New Zealand. When you picture, right, you probably see those incredible landscapes, maybe that famous relaxed lifestyle. It's always topping lists, best places to live on Earth. Sounds like paradise. But the material that we're digging into today, it paints a really different picture, much more challenging, frankly. It describes this clash, the paradise image hitting the tough reality that owning a home, that dream, is just slipping away for so many people, especially younger Kiwis and recent immigrants too. So today we're doing a deep dive. We've got this stack of sources, mainly a really detailed, data-heavy report. And it doesn't pull any punches connecting New Zealand's housing crisis to some big core things. Things like the economy structure, pay issues, those huge shifts in immigration, and even this trend of New Zealanders actually choosing to leave. Our mission really is to cut through the noise. We want to unpack the most crucial insights from this report, the key data, the connections that maybe aren't always obvious. It's about understanding this whole connected national challenge.
And what this material shows is, well, it's a real tangle, isn't it? You've got housing costs that are just eye-watering, then wages that haven't really kept up at all. Plus fundamental issues in the economy setup, a massive wave of migration stressing infrastructure, immigrants facing wage issues themselves, and, like you said, Kiwis deciding, maybe things are better elsewhere. We're going to explore how this report argues these pieces aren't just happening side by side, they're actively feeding each other.
Okay, let's dive in then, starting with the core problem. The housing market numbers themselves. The report lays out the cold, hard data. Median national house price, around $770,000 NZD, based on the latest figures they cite. And Auckland, forget about it. The median there rockets past $1 million, $1.03 million.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, or maybe worrying, is how that stacks up against earnings. The report highlights Auckland's price-to-income ratio. It's 11.5 times the median income.
11.5 times.
Exactly. Basically 11 and a half years of someone's entire pre-tax income, assuming they save every cent just to buy a medium place there.
Yeah.
Compare that to the OECD average, which is, about 6 times? Big difference. And you see the impact clearly in the home ownership rate. Back in 91, it was 73%. Pretty high.
Right.
By 2023. Dropped to 63%. And all this while the country's estimated to be short somewhere between 50,000 and 60,000 homes. A significant shortfall.
Wow. Just let that sink in. A 10-point drop in home ownership in basically a generation. So if you, the listener, were trying to buy or even just rent in New Zealand now, especially Auckland, well, these numbers just scream difficulty. That gap between cost and earnings, it's huge. The report makes that the critical starting point. But okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The report brings in this idea called the immigration paradox. It points to this massive net migration inflow in 2023, over 110,000 people coming in. And this wasn't just random, it was policy. Deliberate, quite aggressive policy after COVID to fill skill gaps.
Right. And the paradox the report talks about isn't just the sheer number, it's where these people are landing. The data shows Auckland soaked up a huge chunk, maybe 35 to 40%.
The biggest city makes sense.
Yeah. Then Wellington, around 15%, Christchurch 12%, Hamilton and Tauranga, maybe 10% combined. So the implication, which the report really stresses, is that this very uneven settlement, it puts just enormous disproportionate pressure on infrastructure in those main centers.
So not just housing.
No, exactly. Housing, yes, but also healthcare, schools, transport. Everything that supports a population is suddenly under intense strain in these few concentrated areas. So you bring people in, which the economy might need on paper, but you're immediately stretching the very systems they need to live and, function. That's the paradox.
Okay, so you've got these sky-high housing costs, huge population pressure in the cities. You'd think wages must be pretty decent to cope, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's pivot to the economic side that the report digs into. It gives the median wage for 2024, $61,692 a year.
61,000.
Yeah. Now, put that against the rents we mentioned. Auckland, 2-bedroom median, $650 to $750 a week. You do the math. That's roughly $34,000 to $38,000 a year, just on rent.
Wow.
The report does a start calculation for lots of Auckland workers. Over 55% of their pre-tax income gone, just on rent. More than half your pay before tax.
That's incredibly tough. And the report kind of analyzes why this is happening, framing it as an economic structure bottleneck. If you look at the GDP contributions, it lists agriculture, dairy about 7%, tourism maybe 5%, construction 7%. But then you look at, say, tech and manufacturing, both under 5%.
So quite traditional sectors are still dominant.
Exactly. The report suggests the economy leans heavily on sectors that are either lower wage, export-focused, and kind of vulnerable, like dairy and tourism, or they face capacity constraints like construction. There isn't that large, scalable, high-skill industry base compared to somewhere like Australia or the UK, according to the report. So what that means for you, the listener, is fewer pathways into those really high-paying, fast-growth jobs that could lift average incomes across the board. It creates this system where it's incredibly hard for wages to keep pace with living costs, especially when housing just eats up such a massive chunk.
Right, so massive demand, population growth concentrated in cities, wages struggling, which leads to the next obvious question the report tackles. Why aren't we just building houses faster? The report points to some systemic blockages and talks about zoning laws, rules that make it hard to build things like townhouses or apartments in lots of suburban areas. And it mentions local councils sometimes resisting the rollout of things like the medium-density residential standards, the very rules meant to allow more homes in existing areas.
Yeah, and then layered on top of that are the issues within the construction sector itself, which the report details pretty clearly. Material costs have gone through the roof. Labor shortages are persistent, finding enough skilled builders, plumbers, electricians.
Right, always hearing about that.
And the building code itself, while important for safety, is complex. Adds time, adds cost. These aren't simple fixes. So the report argues these structural things mean housing supply just constantly trails far behind population growth, especially in Auckland and Wellington, where the pressure cooker is hottest.
And this whole environment, unaffordable housing, wages not keeping up, cities straining, it's leading to another big trend the report flags, the Great Kiwi Exodus. It notes over 40,000 New Zealanders left the country in 2023-24, packed up and left.
40,000? That's a lot of people.
It is. And where are they headed? Mainly Australia. Over 70% according to the source. The UK, Canada also popular. And the report specifically mentions a brain drain concern. Skilled workers leaving nurses, teachers, tech people.
And the report draws a really direct line from the problems we've been talking about to why people are leaving. Based on surveys it cites, the main reasons are pretty clear. Unaffordable housing. Right at the top.
No surprise there.
Not at all. Then the pull of better pay overseas. Frustration, too, about perceived competition for housing and jobs because of high immigration. And just a general sense that the quality of life maybe isn't what it once was. There's actually a really telling quote in the report from a nurse who moved to Brisbane. She says something like, "It's ironic we welcome others here, but we can't afford to stay ourselves."
Wow, that hits hard.
It does. And the report makes the point that this emigration isn't just a symptom. It actually makes the whole challenge worse by draining the country of the skilled people it really needs.
So beyond the big economic numbers and migration flows, the report also looks at the human side.
Yeah.
The social costs. One clear thing is the rise of the renter population. It's now over 40% of households. Renting is becoming the norm for many.
And the data showing the actual strain on people is quite stark. Emergency housing demand, all-time high. Over 27,000 people in insecure housing situations. Plus, you've got over 25,800 people on the wait list for state housing. Huge numbers. The report also touches on this growing intergenerational tension. It notes baby boomers hold something like 55% of the housing wealth. Meanwhile, younger generations face these massive barriers just trying to get a foot on the property ladder. It creates friction.
Definitely.
And the report doesn't just look internally. It brings in global comparisons, which really put things into perspective. It shows New Zealand's national price-to-income ratio at 11.2 times, and the renter burden, how much income goes on rent, around 45 to 55%.
Okay, so how does that compare?
Well, look at Canada, 9.7 times P/I, 35-40% renter burden. Australia, 10.8 times, 40-45%. The UK, 8.5 times, 35%. The US way lower at 5.0 times P/I, 30-35% burden. So the report clearly positions New Zealand right up there among the worst performers on these key affordability measures compared to similar countries.
Okay, so we've mapped out the problem. The numbers, the immigration pressure, supply issues, the economic structure, people leaving, the social stress, and the global context shows it's particularly bad. So what does this all mean? Where do we go from here? The report doesn't just diagnose the illness, it actually suggests potential treatments. It outlines what it calls a multi-pronged rescue plan.
Yeah, it argues there's no single silver bullet. It proposes a whole range of connected actions. On urban planning, loosen up those zoning laws, encourage more mid-rise buildings in cities, and really speed up the building consent process.
Makes sense. Cut the red tape.
Kind of. Then public housing, a big expansion of state-led building projects, especially where the pressure is greatest. Tax reform is mentioned too, introducing an effective capital gains tax or maybe a land value tax to try and cool speculation. On the economy, deliberately trying to diversify. Incentivize growth in sectors like clean tech, biotech, advanced manufacturing, aiming for more high-wage jobs.
Shifting the balance a bit.
Exactly. For immigration, a more balanced approach. Maybe linking residency more closely to developing regions outside the main centers and considering infrastructure capacity. And finally, wages. Looking at things like sectoral wage floors, especially in crucial but often lower paid areas like aged care, construction, retail, to lift earnings from the bottom up. The report presents these as interconnected pathways needed to untangle this really complex knot.
So the report basically concludes New Zealand is at a crucial point, a crossroads, maybe a tipping point.
Yeah.
It sums up the situation we've talked through as this collision, right? High immigration focused on cities, wages lagging, an economy needing diversification, and this housing market that acts like the report calls it a fortress of exclusion. Powerful words.
They are. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the report's warning is pretty clear. It says if really bold integrated reforms aren't tackled soon, reforms across planning, tax, and economic strategy, the country risks permanently damaging that Kiwi dream. And maybe more critically, it risks driving away the very people it needs most. Its youth, its workers, its future talent.
Which brings us to a final thought, really. Based on everything this report lays out, given how deeply connected all these challenges seem to be, housing, immigration, the economy, people leaving, is it actually possible, as the report implies, to fix just one piece in isolation? Or does this analysis strongly suggest that only a comprehensive, integrated approach tackling all these fronts together is the only real path forward for New Zealand? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material on New Zealand's housing challenge. Definitely keep that final thought in mind. We'll catch you next time.